Have you ever felt that the world around you was nothing more than a thin layer of paint? A fragile, colorful coating applied over something much darker and more ancient. We trust our senses because we have no other choice. But sometimes, the paint begins to peel. Reality is not a solid wall. It is a curtain, and occasionally, the wind from the other side blows it open. I used to be a delivery driver, a nomad of the asphalt, navigating the veins of the city for a few dollars a delivery. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that feels like a loop before anything even happens. The app pinged with a high-paying order to a neighborhood I'd never heard of. The Orchards. The pay was triple my usual rate, a golden carrot dangled in front of a tired horse. I accepted without thinking, my thumb tapping the screen before my brain could register the oddity of the location. The GPS guided me away from the neon glow of the city and into the suburban fringe. As I drove, the streetlights became sparse, replaced by a strange, humming silver fog. Then, I saw the entrance. A massive stone archway that seemed to swallow the road. Beyond the arch, the world changed instantly. The grass was too green, a neon emerald that hurt the eyes under the moonlight. The houses were perfect, identical two-story boxes with white picket fences and manicured lawns. It looked like a movie set, or a dream of the 1950s that had never been allowed to die. I checked my phone, the blue dot of my GPS pulsing steadily as I turned onto Unity Drive. The silence was the first thing that started to itch at the back of my skull. There were no crickets, no distant sirens, no wind rustling the leaves of the perfectly round trees. Even my engine sounded muffled, as if the air itself was made of cotton. I pulled up to the address provided, house number 7. It was a pastel yellow house with a red roof, looking cheerful and hollow all at once. I grabbed the thermal bag and stepped out of the car, the soles of my shoes clicking loudly on the pavement. Every house is my destination, but none of them have a door. I froze, the thought hitting me like a physical blow as I stared at the front of house number 7. Where the door should have been, there was only a seamless stretch of yellow siding. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, thinking the shadows were playing tricks on my exhausted mind. I walked up the path, my heart beginning to drum a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached out and touched the wall where the handle should have been. It wasn't wood or plastic. It felt like cold, dry skin, slightly yielding under my fingertips. I backed away, stumbling toward the street, and looked at the next house in the row. It was identical. Pastel yellow, red roof, no door. I looked at the house across the street, and then the one next to it. They were all number 7. Every single house on the street had the number 7 bolted to the siding in gleaming brass. I pulled out my phone to call the customer, but the screen was a mess of static and jagged lines. The GPS map had dissolved into a void, showing only a single flickering sentence. Location, unknown. Then, the color began to bleed out of the world. The emerald grass turned a sickly ashen gray in a matter of seconds. The yellow houses faded into the color of wet concrete, their vibrancy drained by some invisible sponge. The sky above wasn't black or blue. It was the color of a dead television channel. I ran back to my car, fumbling with the keys, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The engine groaned, a metallic scream of protest, before falling completely silent. I sat there in the dark, the dashboard lights flickering and dying like embers. That's when I saw the first one. In the second-story window of house number 7, a curtain twitched. A figure was standing there, perfectly still, framed by the pale light of an unseen lamp. It looked human, but the proportions were wrong. The neck was a fraction too long, the shoulders too narrow. I stared, paralyzed, as more figures appeared in the windows of every house on the block. They didn't move. They just stood there, watching me from behind the glass. Their eyes weren't eyes at all, but twin pits of absolute oily darkness. No pupils, no iris, just 2 holes bored into a pale porcelain face. I realized then that they weren't waiting for a delivery. They were waiting for the guest who had finally arrived to fill the empty space in their neighborhood. I tried to scream, but the air in my lungs felt heavy and thick, like I was breathing silt. The figures began to lean forward, their foreheads pressing against the glass in perfect unison. The glass didn't break. It began to stretch, warping around their faces like plastic wrap. I realized with a jolt of pure terror that they didn't need doors to get out. The houses were part of them, and they were part of the houses. I scrambled out of the car and began to run down the middle of the gray asphalt road. Every time I passed a house, the number 7 mocked me from the wall. I ran until my legs burned, but the archway I had entered through was nowhere to be found. The street simply looped back on itself, a Mobius strip of suburban nightmare. I stopped, collapsing to my knees in the center of the road, the silence now screaming in my ears. The figures were no longer in the windows. They were standing on the lawns, their pale forms glowing faintly in the gloom. They moved with a jerky stop-motion gait, closing the distance between us inch by inch. One of them, a woman in a gray floral dress, tilted her head at an impossible angle. "Is it here?" she whispered, her voice sounding like dry leaves skittering over pavement. I realized she wasn't asking about the food in my bag. She was asking about my soul, the only thing left in this place that still had color. I closed my eyes and prayed for a sunrise that I knew would never come to this dimension. When I opened them, the figures were standing in a perfect circle around me. They weren't attacking. They were just waiting. Waiting for me to stop resisting, to let the gray seep into my skin and my eyes. I looked down at my hands and saw the edges of my fingernails beginning to fade to ash. The 7 doesn't take you by force. It simply waits for you to forget who you are. Now, I spend my days standing in the window of house number 7. I watch the street, waiting for the hum of an engine that sounds like life. I am waiting for the next delivery. Because every house is a destination, and eventually everyone finds their way home to the orchards.